All right, well, thank you everyone for making the time to come out today on a Saturday. Really appreciate it. I had to stop and think then what day it is because it's been a bit of a whirlwind. But yeah, thank you so much everyone for coming out. It's really special to have you all here today to launch this book, and I know it really means a lot to the authors that are here today as well to have a support person here. So today I'd also like to, just before we begin, say a very big thank you to Rose from C3 who has very kindly sponsored this event. This event wouldn't have happened without Rose's support. There's no way I could have put something on here from Brisbane and had the money to travel down and find a venue and cater, for everyone. So yeah, Rose, thank you so much for supporting this event. So today I'm just going to be sharing a little bit about myself and my backstory and how that inspired the creation of this book. Many of you here today probably know the story, but I'll share it for anyone who might be new. And then I'll also be inviting a couple of my local authors from the book to come up and join me and share a little bit about their stories and where they are today in their journeys. And it's just going to be an inspiring and sort of hopeful storytelling afternoon. And we do have some awesome prizes here as well. So make sure you got your raffle tickets on you. Don't lose them because we'll be drawing those soon. So you likely all know that my name's Jas. I am based in Brisbane. I'm a writing coach, author of this series. I'm a ghostwriter and mental health speaker, and I'm also the co-founder of Brisbane's first domestic violence memorial, which is permanent domestic violence memorial that I co-founded in 2016 to honour the memories of people in our town who had been lost to DV. My story, is one that is very common in many ways. There's a lot of things in my story that I know probably many of you in this audience will have experienced. And but I share it because I feel that we all have things that draw us together, and no matter what we've been through in life, there are these common elements that really help us to bind together and find strength together, and that's why I share my story. So to take you right back to the start, before I started doing any of this advocacy work or anything like that, I grew up in a beautiful little town on the mid-north coast of New South Wales. I don't know if anyone here has heard of Coffs Harbour? Yeah. So we grew up in a beautiful little part of a valley which is sort of just south of Coffs Harbour. So in many ways my childhood was very idyllic because I got to grow up in the mountains, and I had a horse to ride and chickens and animals. So there were so many things in my childhood that were really amazing and really great. And I think that's probably also why it took so many people as a surprise when they later found out, some people only more recently, that we lived in fear and terror a lot of those years. I had an extremely verbally and mentally abusive father who was sometimes physically abusive to my mum as well. I want to honour my brave mum who's here today and allows me to share these stories because they can be a little bit difficult to hear and relive. So I had a very caring and supportive mum growing up, and I've always been very, very grateful for that. And I think that's probably what really helped us to draw strength during those years when my dad was very volatile and abusive. So he obviously struggled with mental health issues, but this was the 1990s and no one talked about mental health. Nobody had campaigns for domestic violence awareness. There were no Me Too campaigns. Australia says no to DV, nothing like that. No one in our smallish town or community really knew what was going on. You sort of kept all those things to yourself. And my mum was an expert in diffusing volatile blow-ups and trying to stop, those Jekyll and Hyde moments that would come out quite regularly. So I really remember from the age of 10 being extremely anxious, extremely depressed, although I didn't know what depression was back then. I just remember feeling this really deeply entrenched sadness that was kind of there every day. And I knew it had a lot to do with my dad and his behaviour. But as I said, with no awareness around family violence or mental health, and certainly no friends at school who talked about anything like this, I didn't actually know what was happening. I just knew that it was not a nice environment to spend every day living in. There were many things that my dad would do to, I think, his main thing was that he really needed control. He didn't feel like he had control over his life. And so this, played out in a lot of different ways, where he would do things like hiding the car keys so that we couldn't go, Mum and I couldn't go anywhere. Even things like taking the batteries out of the mouse so that we couldn't use the computer to do anything. We didn't have mobile phones, smartphones, so computer was the only access to anything we might need to find. He would just do anything he could to achieve control. He would do things like leave me and my 12-year-old friend sitting alone in a video store with my mum for 2 hours while we waited until he was ready to come and get us, which we had no idea when that would be. I just remember sitting at this little children's table for 4-year-olds with my friend. We were both in about year 6, and I just felt so ashamed that we were sitting there with crayons just drawing because we were so bored. And I just have to keep saying, I'm so sorry, I don't know when Dad's coming, hopefully he's coming soon. So it was all about, him having control was really what it was all about. So those years, as sort of from the age of 10, I think my depression started to get worse and worse. I felt like I was living sort of a day-to-day walking on eggshells. I never knew what kind of dad I was going to come home to. He would, say a lot of really nasty things, telling me that I, was stupid and never going to achieve anything, and things like that are, of course, difficult for anyone to hear, but especially when you are, sort of a 11, 12-year-old, 13-year-old trying to find your sense of identity and who you are in the world. It's incredibly damaging. And so I really just remember my depression spiraled further and further the older I got, and the further I got through school. I started to feel like my head was like sort of just bobbing above the water, and it felt like I couldn't breathe, and there was never going to be any way out. And I share this because I know that this is something that so many young people struggle with, especially in school, where they feel, because they are living in this bubble of school, they feel that there's nothing else out there for them. They're never going to achieve anything. They can't see anything beyond school, because that's your whole world when you're 16, 17. So I know that, those years were extremely hard, and I just felt that maybe if I could just push through and get through school, then everything would be better. I could move out, I could get away from Dad. Everything would be better as long as I could finish school. And so despite, the suicidal cravings that I really had during those years, I just tried to push on. I was extremely studious, so I just threw myself into my work. I think that was part of my anxiety as well, was that I had to do good at school because it was the only thing that I could really control. So I did very well in school, but the depression and the anxiety and everything was still there. And I finished school, and I thought, I've made it. Maybe now there's something better waiting out there for me. I just need to move away from home and everything will be okay. And it was the night after, I think, I still remember vividly, I picked up the phone, and I think we were still using landlines then, so I must have taken the cordless phone to my room and made this secret call to a friend of Mum's who had given us a safe house to live in a year prior, which we'd lived in for around 6 months, while my dad sort of got his act together and, showed he was remorseful, and we felt that we could come back home. Of course, that safety only lasted a few months, and he was back to the same patterns. So I remember calling this friend of Mum's, and I just begged her and said, have you got any other properties? Is there anywhere that I can stay for a little while until, I can find somewhere? And she said, I'm so sorry, Jas, but we don't have any more properties at the moment. They're all being developed. And I felt, in that moment, I just felt so hopeless that nothing was ever going to change. And it was probably a day or maybe 2 days after that I went to work one day, seemingly ordinary day. I think it was a Sunday, I'm not sure. Yeah, I went to work and everything seemed fine. I remember leaving work and my neighbour was waiting at the sliding doors for me to the car park, and I thought, why is my neighbour here looking at me? This is strange, Mum should be here to pick me up. And she just sort of looked at me and just said, oh, come out to the car. And I remember being filled with this overwhelming sense of dread that something had happened, something had finally happened to Mum. And she called me out to the car and Mum was there, and I said, what's wrong, what's happened? I was thinking, you know, maybe there was a car accident or an accident on the farm or something. And that was the day that we found out that my dad had actually taken his life. And this is always one of the hardest parts of my story to share, and has always been, because it's extremely difficult to explain to people that you can feel shock and you can feel anger and you can feel sadness, but you can also be filled with overwhelming relief when a family member is lost in that way. And that's not something that's really ever talked about when we talk about someone taking their life or dying suddenly. But I know in that moment, I was flooded with, you know, people texting me or calling me saying how sorry they were. And I just wanted to shout, stop telling me you're sorry, because I'm not. I'm relieved. I feel like I'm safe for the first time in, 8 years or something like that. And so it was really, really hard to come to grips with these feelings of obviously being in shock and not wanting my dad to die in that way. I just wanted the abuse to stop. I just wanted him to disappear in terms of going away and getting help for himself. But that was a whole other level of trauma to deal with the previous 8 or so years of, verbal and mental abuse, followed by his death. And so I really went out into the world as this young woman that had no real sense of how to put up boundaries in a lot of ways. It's strange because when I tell this, in so many ways I was really good at setting boundaries for things like, I knew that I wasn't interested in taking drugs. It didn't matter how many times somebody asked me if I wanted to take drugs, I'd say no. I couldn't be peer pressured in so many ways, but when it came to going out into the world and meeting guys, I didn't know how to set boundaries, how to say no to things that, even if it was a date. I just didn't want to hurt any guy's feelings. And I also was terrified that no one would ever love me. So I felt that I had to say yes to everything because I was just so desperate for someone to tell me that I was worth something. And it's a shockingly sobering sort of reality for so many women or young girls who grow up with dysfunctional relationships with their fathers or abusive relationships or even a lack of a relationship with a father, is so many young women go on to experience abusive relationships themselves because they haven't had a male role model to really show them what to look out for in a male partner. So I would just, try to find anyone who, if someone was nice to me, that was it. I was, sold. They were the one, All they had to do was take me out for a date, tell me I was pretty, be nice to me, show the smallest amount of interest, and I'd be like, oh, this could be the guy. So when I met a guy at around age 19, not long after Dad's death, who showered me with, adoration and told me how special I was and how he would never hurt me, there were no alarm bells ringing, really. There was a little feeling in my gut, which I remember feeling something's a bit off about this guy, the way that he's so overt with his adoration. Like it made me feel uncomfortable, but at the same time I thought, oh, I hope he's just not one of those really, nice guys who's too nice. But that, which now sounds weird when you say that, but I just thought, oh, he's too nice. But in reality, when I look back, I think the little voice inside me was saying it's not that he's too nice, it's that there's something wrong with the way he is showing affection. It doesn't feel natural. But because I was so desperate for love, I just pushed that aside, and I started spending time with him, and I just ignored any red flag that came up. Months might go by, I wouldn't speak to him about something, but then I would find myself picking up the phone to message him, or I would run into him in town and we would start going on dates again or hanging out. He was really a friend in a lot of ways, so he was someone that I just felt like I could trust and be myself around. And he really spent a period of probably 18 months telling me how special I was and how, he really wanted to be in a serious relationship with me one day. It just wasn't the right timing yet, but when it was right timing for him and his work, and he knew he was going to be around long term, then we'd have a really serious, special relationship. And I just really hung on to that because I believed that maybe one day he would settle down with me. And it was probably about 18 months of, us going on dates every now and then, hanging out, when he sexually assaulted me one night. And that came probably directly a day after he had once again said to me, I will never hurt you, I will never force you to do anything until you're ready. He knew what my boundaries were. He knew that I was waiting for a serious relationship and he wasn't able to give that to me yet. So it was very clear that he made that decision knowing that I was not okay with what he was about to do. And that moment was really life-changing for me in the way that I realised that I really had to take control of my life. I think that was the moment that kind of broke me in the right way, because before that there was nothing else that was going to stop me from pursuing these unhealthy relationships or putting myself in situations where I was at risk of being hurt in some way. And so I really, as awful as that was and as difficult as it was to pull myself out of that black hole after that experience, I had to sit back and look at what I was doing, the decisions that I was making around who I was spending time with, and I decided that I was going to stop hanging out with some of these people, stop going out and drinking so much. I was going to be more mindful about what choices I made around men. Obviously, I was terrified of any guy after that, so I really didn't want to go near anyone. And it was only a few months after that I was extremely blessed in that I had a very incredibly beautiful and respectful man that came into my life who had gone to school with me, and he was aware of what had happened. He had seen this person around before who had assaulted me, and he was really the catalyst, I think, that helped me hit reset on my life, because if he hadn't come into my life at that time, I don't know that I could have ever trusted again, and I'm not sure how my judgment would have been in terms of breaking those unhealthy relationships with men. But he came in and he helped me to reset my life, and he showed me every day that he was someone that I could trust. And he was the first guy who didn't just tell me that I could trust him. He spent every day showing that to me, and I think that was what helped me to start to rebuild my life, because for the first time I saw that there was someone who was willing to back up what they were saying, and that was new to me. But over time it taught me that I had a right to stand up for myself. I had a right to say what I did and didn't want to do. If I didn't feel well and didn't want to come into town one day to meet up with him, that was fine. He didn't guilt trip me like the person beforehand, telling me, you don't make promises and then go back on them, things like that. Everything I had experienced previously with the person who assaulted me really amounted to gaslighting, but I didn't know what that was back then. So after that, I started to try to rebuild my life a day at a time. And I was in a relationship with this lovely guy for about 3.5 years, and that really helped me to start to rebuild my life and learn how to sort of thrive again. But I still was stuck in these old thought patterns where I sort of went, I don't know that I'll really achieve much with my life. I'm living in a small town, I'm working in retail, there's nothing here for me. I feel like I'm not growing, I'm just stuck. And I had to make a really important choice again, and that choice meant that I had to end that relationship, which was an extremely beautiful and serious relationship, but we both wanted different things and we wanted to live in different places, and he was happy with the small town life, and I knew that I was going to be stuck and I would never grow if I stayed there. So I made a decision to move away, and that one decision led me pretty much to where I am today, because when I moved away, I one day just saw something online about a festival up in Toowoomba. It was a music and arts and sort of culture festival called Easter Fest, and they have a lot of different social causes there, and they have a lot of bands and things like that. And I just decided to apply for a volunteer photojournalist position. I had been working as a photographer for many years, so it sort of felt perfect for me. I had my degree in writing, but I had no experience, so I was really eager to try and create something with my life. And that decision to go along and be a volunteer photojournalist actually meant I got fired from my job at the time, because they were not very happy with me asking for a long weekend off. But it's funny, because that one decision to volunteer really catapulted me into discovering my sense of identity and my purpose in the world, because when I went along, I started to discover all these amazing organizations and people who were fighting causes like human trafficking and doing really great things in the world. And those things really resonated with me, because as a young girl, even when I was 10 years old and I remember lying on my bed writing in my diary, I remember I would be listening to Dad's shouting, and I would be thinking, one day I want to help other people. One day I want to be able to use all of this in some way to help someone else. And so when I went to that festival and I started feeling this real heart calling to do something that would actually matter and help people, that one action started, a movement which has led to me, advocating for human trafficking, going overseas and helping to renovate a house for a rescue girl who had been a victim of human trafficking and had been given a new life. I started to interview interesting people across Australia just for my blog. One of those women here today, Genevieve. Where are you, Jen? There. Genevieve was, I reached out to her in 2013 because I knew she was doing incredible things to help women here in Melbourne, and I interviewed her, and I started to do a lot of work around domestic violence and exploitation of women and human trafficking and things like that. And I still had no idea what I wanted to do long term. I still had trouble making any goals, because those mindsets were still ingrained in me from childhood that told me that don't make goals because you're just going to fail anyway. I still had those things that I hadn't worked through, and I was now, around age 20, 28, 29, 30. So when I share my story, I say to people, you don't have to overcome things overnight. I certainly didn't. It took me a long time. What I did do was I threw myself into trying to experience many different things and trying my hand at many different things, whether that was photography, journalism. I would go and spend my nights writing gig reviews for bands in my town. I just tried to do lots of different things that would help me feel like I was making a difference, and at the same time getting an idea of what things I was passionate about. And really, I did that volunteer work for about 3.5 years while I was working full-time in admin jobs that I hated. But, I knew that if I could keep doing the things that I felt passionate about, not only was it good for my mental health, but it was helping other people at the same time. And the more I did it, the more doors slowly opened up. It took a very long time. Like I said, it was probably 3.5 years of volunteering, and maybe 5 to 6 years after finishing my degree that I got my first paid job as an assistant magazine editor. It took a very, very long time, but I just didn't give up along the way. I knew that I just needed to keep moving forward slowly, doing things that I was passionate about, and one day maybe things would change. And over the years, that has led to me co-founding the Domestic Violence Memorial in my town. I have, interviewed lots of really amazing people across Australia, just helping them share their stories. And all of this sort of brought me to this moment in 2016 where I was thinking about all the things that I'd achieved and how ironic it was, because I once was this very frightened and shy, self-loathing little girl who just thought that the world would be better off without her because she was too stupid to achieve anything. And I thought, well, how did I get to this point? How did I find the resilience to get here when so many other people don't have that strength? There's nothing that makes me special or particularly stronger than anyone else in this room. But I thought, why am I still here when we're losing 2,500 people a year at that time to suicide? And that got me thinking about what might be the next social issue that I could really talk about. What's something that has a lot of stigma around it still, that a lot of people aren't comfortable talking about, but I have some sort of connection to it, and maybe it's something that I could make an impact on. And I remember reading this ABC report about losing around 8 Australians a day to suicide. And I thought, bugger it, like, this is something I've got to talk about. I had still not really told anybody at that point about Dad's death. I told all my close friends, they all knew, but I still had never spoken to anyone really about his suicide. It wasn't an issue that I was comfortable talking about. But I think there was just something in me that just went, well, if I experienced all of this and I'm still here, what's the point of saying nothing? I mean, not everyone feels that way, and that's fine. Not everyone needs to talk about their traumas. But for me, I thought, what's the point of not saying anything about this? This is something that I've experienced that's unique to me, that I have some sort of authority to speak on. And it was literally as small as that. It was just that moment, a little thought that ran through my head, and I thought, that's it. I'm just going to start calling everyone I know who's got a really amazing story, and I'm going to start interviewing them, and I don't even know what this is going to be. I don't know what it will become, but I will start finding other people who've been able to, beat suicide, or who have experienced really dark traumas and found a way out the other side, and I'm going to ask them how they did it, because I just thought, if I can do it, there's got to be other people, whose stories could really help other people as well. And so that was the beginning of creating Reasons to Live. And I spent about 6 months interviewing people from all over Australia, from little Western, little small Aboriginal communities in Western Australia, through to people like, Elfresh the Lion and Michael Crosland, who are really well-known, internationally renowned people who, are well-renowned for their speaking or their music and their art. And that was because I didn't want to have a book just filled with celebrities, but I wanted it to be diverse. I wanted to hear from high-profile people who many would say, oh, well, what have they got to be depressed about? Their life's perfect. And I also wanted to talk to people from small communities who were just doing, inspiring things in their towns, and hear, what their lives have been like as well. And and that became this book, Reasons to Live. And I really just thought that would be the end. I would just release this book and maybe sell it to like some of my friends, and that would be it. And it was maybe a year ago, I started getting people saying, when are you going to make the next one? When's the next one? Because I want to tell my story, or I'm ready to share my story. I know someone whose story could impact someone. And I started to get more and more messages from people saying, I read your book, and it showed me that I can keep on going. There was a young man from the UK who said to me, I've just got out of hospital from my 7th suicide attempt, and I just picked your book up, and I feel like it saved my life, because I didn't know that anybody else goes through these things, and it's just means so much to hear other people share their stories, and to know that we're all in this together. And I think that was what showed me that this little project or idea maybe had a lot more power than I expected it to ever have. And so that's propelled me to, where I am now. I've spent the last 2 years traveling everywhere from, main cities like Sydney to little towns like Weipa in far north Queensland, sharing my story and bringing communities together just to spread the message that, you know, we do all go through very difficult things, but we, you know, wherever we are in our journeys now is not necessarily where we have to stay or where life's going to stay. And as dark as things may feel, there is a way through that pain. There is a way through to a more hopeful life, and you may not see that overnight or even in a week or a month, but if you keep pushing on, you will find those better days. And that is really what every person in Reasons to Live has shown me and has shared through their stories, is that regardless of what they've been through, whether it's domestic violence or you know, whether they live with bipolar disorder or they live with chronic illness, or whether they've suffered childhood trauma, whatever it is, they all have come to the same key theme of hope, of pushing on until you find those better days. And it doesn't matter what you've experienced, it is possible to rebuild your life to something where you can fall in love with life again. And it's not easy. I know that. And so, yeah, I just want to thank you guys all for coming today, because it means so much to me to be able to bring people together to share our stories. And in a moment, I'm going to invite two of my newest writers from Reasons to Live up to share their stories.